Today, I want to talk about why I gave my life to Jesus. This isn't going to be an emotional testimony or a church sermon or anything like that. I'm just going to walk you through the logical process that got me there, like genuinely stripping away all the emotion and just working through this step by step. Because honestly, I think a lot of people have the wrong idea of what Christianity is actually all about. And I know I definitely did for a long time. So today I want to break down why it made sense to me, why I think it could make sense to you too, and clear up some misconceptions that kept me from taking it seriously for years. Look, I don't have all the answers. I'm just a 21-year-old kid just figuring life out just like everyone else, but this is what's worked for me, and I think it's worth talking about. So to start, I grew up in the church, which I guess a lot of people would automatically label as being a Christian, but honestly, at that point in my life, I wouldn't have called myself that. But because I didn't actually understand what it meant, it was more like something I was around, not something I had really thought through myself. One of the biggest misconceptions I had, and I think a lot of people still have, is that Christianity is basically about being a perfect or a good person. Like you're supposed to have all your stuff in your life together, make all the right choices, never mess up, and kind of rise above everyone else in a morality sense. And honestly, part of why that idea exists is because some Christians think of themselves that way. People can get prideful, like their morals put them at a higher level than everyone else, and that ends up making Christianity look like a self-improvement competition instead of what it actually is. But the more I started actually thinking about it, the more I realized that there's no point at it at all. A real understanding of Christianity starts with the opposite idea, that you're not perfect, not even close, and not in a fake, oh, I'm so humble way, but in a real recognition that you mess up, you fall short, and you can't fix yourself into being a good enough person on your own. For me personally, that was actually one of the things that made me question it for a long time. I remember thinking, this is all about being a good person. I'm basically going to be disqualified already, because I knew myself well enough to know I was never going to hit some perfect standard. And that made the whole thing feel impossible, like I was always going to be playing catch up to something I couldn't reach. But what I eventually started to understand, and what I learned over time, is that Christianity isn't really built on the idea that you have to earn your way to being good enough. It's built on the idea that you admit you're not, and you need help outside of yourself. That being said, you might need a savior. That's where Jesus comes in. It's not about pretending you've got it all figured out. It's about being honest that you don't. And that kind of flips everything upside down, because suddenly that focus isn't be better so you can be accepted. It's you're already accepted, and now your life starts to change because of that. It's a completely different mindset. It's probably the biggest shift I had to understand. Christianity isn't centered around becoming a good person in order to qualify. It's centered around acknowledging your need for grace and a savior, and then actually letting that reshape you over time. Not instantly, not perfectly, but genuinely. Again, once I started to understand that, a lot of the pressure I had in my head started to disappear, because it stopped being about me trying to reach some impossible standard of perfection and started being about something I could actually respond to instead of achieve. So what actually changed in my life after I started seeing it this way? First off, I stopped trying to live like I was supposed to be perfect all the time. Before, I kind of treated Christianity like this constant self-improvement project. Like if I just tried hard enough, made the right decisions, avoided the wrong things, I'd eventually be a good person and maybe get my way into heaven. But once I actually understood it differently, I realized something pretty important. I'm never going to be perfect. Like not in a dramatic way, just in a human way. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to say things I shouldn't. I'm going to make selfish decisions sometimes, even though I don't want to. And even if I try my absolute hardest, I'm still going to fall short at some point in time in my life. And instead of that making me feel worse, it actually made things feel lighter. Because before, every time I messed up, it felt like I had to mentally punish myself for it. I'd replay it in my head, try to figure out where I went wrong, and just go blah, 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 blah. But now it's different. When I mess up, I can acknowledge it and be like, yeah, that wasn't right. And instead of sitting there for beating myself up for hours or days, I can just take it, be honest about it with God, move forward. Again, there's still accountability, but that's not the same level of self-destruction that used to come with it. And weirdly enough, that's actually made me better in a practical sense too. Not because I suddenly became a different person, but because I stopped getting sucked into this cycle of guilt and overthinking, which just led to more bad behavior. I can fail, recognize it, and keep going without it completely derailing me. It also changed how I see progress. I don't look at my life anymore like I need to arrive at being a good person, more like a process. I'm just trying to grow over time, and when I do mess up, I don't cancel everything out. So instead of constantly trying to prove something, I'm just trying to live in a way that reflects what I believe now. Not out of pressure, but out of gratitude to Jesus. Not because I'm trying to earn anything, but because I've already been given grace. And that shift honestly brought me a lot more peace than I expected. It didn't make life easier in the sense that problems disappear, but it made it easier in a sense that I was able to handle it myself when things went wrong. And over time, that's actually made me more consistent, more grounded, and ironically, a better version of myself than when I was trying so hard to be one on my own. So if I had to leave you with some advice or life lesson from all this, it would be pretty simple. First, I genuinely think the best decision decision you can make in your life is giving your life to Jesus. And I know that sounds like a big statement, but I don't mean it in some overly complicated or intense way. I just mean it as an honest starting point. If you're watching this and you're not a Christian, or you're unsure, or you've been kind of on the fence for a while, the simplest thing I'd say is to start by praying. I think we think prayer has to be perfect, but it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be some structured religious thing. Literally just talk to God when you're first starting out. Because from what I understand and what I believe, you don't have to clean your life up before you do that. You don't have to become a better person first. You don't have to fix everything that's wrong with you and then show up qualified enough. That's not really how this works. A big part of this is just being honest and acknowledging where you're at, what you're struggling with, and recognizing that you can't really do everything on your own. And if you're actually willing to take that step, I honestly believe God meets you there. Not after you've proven yourself, not after you've figured everything else out on your own, but right in the middle of where you are. And that goes for things that you're struggling with, such as like sins, right? Doing the wrong things and being a bad person. But this also goes for having doubts if God's even real. He will meet you where you're at. Somebody who maybe grew up around church or has just heard about Christianity, but only really got a distaste version or a surface level version of it. Maybe you saw people act one way in church and completely different outside of it. Or maybe you've just been confused by what it actually means versus what people say it means. And if that's you, I'd honestly just say take time to actually learn what it is for yourself. Because a lot of people reject Christianity, not because they really understood it, but because they've seen bad representations of it. And to be fair, there are real issues. There are people who misuse religion all the time. People act in ways that don't reflect their Christianity. There's been failures and scandals and problems with the church. That doesn't automatically define what Christianity actually is at its core. Just because someone claims to represent it doesn't mean they actually do. At its foundation, Christianity is basically people recognizing that they can't save themselves and choosing to put their faith in Jesus as their savior. That's the core idea. Everything else is supposed to flow from that, not replace it. But again, I'll be honest, I'm not a pastor, I'm not a priest, I'm not a theologian, I'm not trying to act like I have everything figured out. I'm just a 21-year-old trying to understand life the same way everyone else is. But this is what I've come to understand so far, and it's what's made the most sense to me out of everything I've looked at. At the end of the day, there are a lot of misconceptions about Christianity, and I get that everyone's experience with it can look a little different. People come from different backgrounds, churches, conversations, and sometimes they see life in a completely different way. But I honestly believe that if you're willing to seek out the truth and you're willing to be honest about your own flaws and your own need for grace, then I believe not just hope, but genuinely believe that Jesus meets you there. Not because you've earned it, but that's what the whole message is built on. I want to end this video with a Bible verse that sums up this whole video. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. That's the entire point of Christianity. It's not about being perfect, it's not about proving yourself, it's not about earning your way into something, it's about grace. And that's why I made the decision I did, and why I share it in the first place. And it's really that simple. But now that you understand the foundation of faith and grace that guides how I live my life and how it could guide yours, there are specific decisions that people make in their 20s that quietly destroy everything they're trying to build. So check out this video where I break down the 10 ways to destroy your life in your 20s. You're going to want to avoid those.